Hello, everyone. My name is Alexey, and my talk will be about Chef InSpec for security and compliance automation. So this is small amount of information about me. I'm web and mobile developer, DevOps, also did some open source books and libraries, and lead a robot podcast. But let's move to our theme, and let's start about security, as always. So in company, like especially big companies, security split into areas. We had application security. It's special team that's responsible for handling everything about project inception, releases, security standpoints for applications. Was my last theme on Ruby C in previous year. Was about basic application security. Also exists incident response and monitoring. It's a team which should do something when incidents arise, like something happens, and they should react and have plans for this. Also, corporate and IT security, it's management internal security. I mean, like employees, notebooks, assets management, device monitoring, everything else. So some slow will not penetrate into your internal stuff, into your network, your company. And of course, exists governance risk and compliance. This area management about certifications. That's exactly what I will talking about today. So this is part which we need to cover. So what's the difference about IT security and IT compliance? So in security, it's practice to protect your data, your diligence, integrity of your critical business assets. So this is exactly the process which you are doing to protect all this stuff. Compliance is the process to meeting third-party requirements for digital security. So like some companies said, this is our document, you should meet this document to be compliant. So what's the benefit of IT security and compliance? So security benefits, it's your own, of course, practice. So you don't need to certify anyone. Like if you do security, just do it. It's driven by the needs to protect your data, to protect all your stuff. And it's never a finished process. Like you cannot just our security done. Like security is always changing, and you need also change your protection stuff in your company, application, and everything else. So that's why you cannot say like security done or finished in our company. It's like separate, continuously process. If you go into compliance, in practice, it satisfies external requirements. And this is needs for business. You just need to, like mostly came business and said, we need to comply with this or that stuff. And it can be done, like it's third party satisfied, like your compliance done, and you no need to do something else, maybe like update your compliance later. But this process can be done in quotes. And you can like say, okay, be compliant with this or that document. But of course, it doesn't stop your security process, shouldn't, of course. So what's the benefit? Because mostly we are developers, DevOps, and they're thinking, okay, compliance is like pain, which we should accept sometimes. But of course, it can provide for us benefits too. Like it's increased customer trust and reputation for the business, because when you have some products in some time, when came big customers, they start to ask like, okay, do you comply with this or that document? And if you don't, they like, okay, I'm not sure we can trust to you our data or not. Like this is our first question. If you comply with this document, at least they know you did something to protect their data. Also, it helped you avoid to fine and penalties, because if you comply with something and like happen some data breach, you said we did everything what we can but these documents, guys, but we don't expect this one. Also, it protect your business reputation, like because if you said I had this or that compliance, in these cases you're like, okay, looks like good product, we can use it for our, for example, data or information or something else. And of course, very good stuff, effective security compliance, enhanced company culture, because I saw many products which said like, oh my God, again, compliance, we need to meet this or that. It's the pain. again, we need to fight with this, we need to meet this or these credentials. It's maybe not very good credentials, but if you did this beforehand, if you're thinking then developing your product about all this stuff, about the security myths, like encrypt your data beforehand or do some encryption in transport. In these cases, like all the security will be met mostly automatically. But of course, your team and you always should like remember all this stuff. Should we, for example, work with this product? Do it meet also our compliant documents? Because, for example, some product will be data processor, and we will also give this product data from our users. So this is very important. And some startups even doesn't think about this. Only later, then they grow, they understand, oh, looks like it's a problem and we should deal with this right now. So when you start to thinking about this, you're thinking it's some like manual work to meet these documents, but no, sometimes you also can audit your system in infrastructure and do automatic compliance, like continuously, not just by half a year came someone and asked, okay, let's check by your compliant document how you meet or not. So what tools exist? For today exist several tools, like AWS contain own stuff called Security Hub. It's number of products, which also can check some informations, provide you compliant documents. In Google Cloud, they have Chronicle. Also exist open source tools like Goat, Compliance Masonry. It's not like automation compliance tools, but it's provide you ability to collect several compliance documents from your infrastructure, like AWS, maybe GDPR or something else, and create one compliant document which you can rely and then do some automation on this. Chef InSpec, which we will talk today, and GOS, for example, which also can be used for this compliance stuff. So let's go into Chef InSpec. So what exactly it is? It's open source testing framework by company Chef, and it's specify you provide compliance, security, and audit policy requirements. First of all, why we use it also, because it's written in Ruby, and due to it's written on Ruby without some special modifications, you can use full Ruby infrastructure on top of it. So it's very good if you already know Ruby. So Chef InSpec support many kind of systems like Linux, macOS, Windows. Of course, you need PowerShell 5 or above. Docker images and cloud platforms. Like right now, you can check AWS, Azure, and Google Clouds. So also, it's not only Linux, so you also have BSD platform, Solaris, like these Unix OS systems also covered. So as you can see, you can use it not only for your, for example, Linux systems, but also can comply machines, your macOS or Windows machines in your local office. So to be sure, it's also meet minimum requirement to secure working environment. So after installation, I will not provide the process. It's very simple. You should have this command line utility called InSpec, and it provides your list of the commands which you can use. So list of commands not very big, and let's check how to start to work with it. So mostly they call in Chef InSpec, they call these profiles. Profiles contain several controls. Controls, it's like one single point control, which should be meet or not meet your requirement. Like in test, it's pass or not pass. So profile contains several controls. Like imagine you had your Nginx, like in this example, profile, and you have controls which Nginx should pass. Like it should not provide version number in headers, or it should not send some headers which unsecure. It should close some folders or not serve folders like directory structure. Everything you should put here. Also, your profile should contain inspec YAML and inspec log. Inspec YAML exactly contain metadata about your profile, so you can share your profile to anyone in the company or even outside if you're working with open source solution profile. So YAML contain metadata information like name of your control, title, who is maintainer, license, summary, version number, also what kind of system it supports, Also, it can depend from another profiles, like you can depend from some basic profiles, or maybe you extend some profiles like SSH or something else. And of course, you can provide where exactly in spec version it works. So maybe like it's hard-coded for some in spec version. So next, how it looks like controls. It's very simple. I think who works with RSpec already know this syntax, like you write describe file, and for example, you check in this file that it should be file and automatically should be exist. InSpec automatically has some of these resources, like you can use it. I mean about Docker images, SSH configs, some file system checks. It's already had these resources, which you can provide only information like I need to check this Docker image exists or check some of this Docker image, and you don't need to write additional Ruby code. Of course, here it's use should syntax, but you can use also expect syntax like this. It's not a problem, but maybe it's not clearly, for example, where subject comes from for someone. So you can even write this in this way, like describe some of your test, you're checking the file, and this file should be the file. So this is how it looks like. And next, for example, here our example, we check in our SSH config, and this SSH config should head protocol version 2, and we can run it. So I hope everybody see my screen, and we can write in spec exec, and for example, test 0. Let me show you what exactly in this test 0. We have this SSH config protocol, which should be equal to 2, and use spam should be yes, equal yes. So as you can see, for example, on my local machine, use spam activated, but on my local machine, because target local, it's of course not. I need to go and to fix my configuration to provide to protocol to version 2, or maybe even 3. So this is how it very simple works. As you can see, very similar to any testing frameworks. So let's go back to presentation. And this is how we use InSpec exec. So by default, you can provide one file, as I did. Also, you can provide profile folder, and it will execute all controls in this profile folder. Also, you can use supermarket. Supermarkets like Ruby gems or NPMs. It contains already pre-built profiles, which you can use. And you can just point on one of these profile and activate it. It automatically will download it and run it. Also, you can use Git, even secure Git. If you use GitHub, you can generate this token and just point by this token. And also, even you can use toolbar archive or zip archive. It's pretty useful because InSpec contain command archive, which provide you ability to archive all your profile. And in this case, you can distribute it in archive variants. Like you create new version, create archive, put this into, for example, AWS S3 or Google storage, and then your automated system will get latest version from these cloud providers, unpack it automatically and run it before, like in your testing pipeline. So as you can see, by default, when you do inspec exec, it's execute this exactly in this machine. But of course, it may be not very useful because sometimes like I need to run it on remote machine and check there. And you don't want to install inspec here, of course, because it should contain Ruby and everything else. That's why it also contains this stuff like target. So by default, as you can see, it's just run on local target on this machine, but you can provide -tk and provide, for example, SSH target, like go into SSH and do something else. Or if you use a Windows machine, WinRM, that's why we need PowerShell to use this. And if, for example, you using Docker machines, you can connect to Docker and check like this Docker image container, not image, but already container, meet your requirements. And of course, cloud platform, I will show later how to connect to them. So again, if you go here, I have here a machine, like the Linux machine. And now I can just check and run the same test 0 on this Vagrant machine and check if it's meet my requirements or not. As you can see, the same error. So I can go into my configuration. Like, as you can see, my protocol is commented. So I uncomment this protocol version and again can run. Of course, you shouldn't do this fixing by hands. You should do this your automated tool, like your build tool, maybe use some Docker build image stuff. So I fixed this, and as you can see, my old test summary pass. So if I want to like check something else, like imagine I need to check that auditing package should be installed. As you can see, I provide like package auditing should be installed in the system. And if I go back and again run remotely my command, it will provide for me information. So this package not installed, and I should fix this. So yeah, let's go back. And what about checks? Sometimes you need to check, like in our example, SSH config, you need to check maybe it's meet version 2, but maybe version 3. This like newer the version and also should be good to you. In these cases, you can use syntax describe one. It's like or checks. So in describe one, at least one check should pass. So if it pass at least one, like everything good. It will be useful, as I said, for example, if you're not sure, like, and these settings also good, and you need to provide this information in some way into your controls checks. Also very useful to use block control. So because by default, as you can see, it was like describe it, it's like AirSpec, but more useful to use and block control, which provide additional keys attributes, which you can use like impact, title, description, and of course you can use also not if, only if, like for example, this one check that this can be used only on Linux machines. Title description, very useful because you can provide more information like why you need this check, why this check exists. For example, maybe you can point even on document where exactly this provided and this need to be done. Impact is also very interesting stuff. Impact, it's value based on, let me show you, on common vulnerability scoring system. It's a special system which used to define how critical this vulnerability or not. It even contains this calculator, which of course you can like, if you don't know, you itself calculate all this attack complexity, privileges requirements, and then check what is your score. Like in these cases, it's low. So in these cases, it can contain numbers or strings. Like, as you can see, these numbers mean like no impact. We can just provide information. Like if you not meet, it's okay. It's just for your information. And of course, low, medium, high, and critical. I think everyone understands what does this mean. Like mostly critical, it's like, oh my God, we need to fix this immediately. So why control is so important? Because if your profile written in controls, you can include controls into your profiles. Like imagine you write your own stuff, and also you found out basic controls for your Linux machines, for Nginx, for SSH server, maybe for even installation of some software. In these cases, you can just add this into dependency in InSpec YAML, as I showed you before. And here in your Ruby file, just write include controls. And it automatically will include all controls from this profile. So in these cases, you can like extend your profile with additional controls. But in these cases, you can ask, okay, but what if I need only special controls from this profile, or maybe exclude some controls? It's also possible. You can use the block. And for example, you can skip some controls, like from this Nginx hardening, I don't need this one and this one. Or maybe I need only these two and skip everything else. It's also possible you can do in this way. Or even imagine another way, like you need this control, but you need change impact. Like, for example, built in Nginx hardening control, impact for some control very low or very high for you. And you decided I need to change it. Of course, you can go and copy paste this control, but better in these cases, modify it in the block. So you can write like include controls, and you can change impact of this control. Like for this one, it's lower, but for this one, it should be higher. It's critical for us. We should upper this control. So what about supermarket? Yes, if you go into inspect supermarket profiles, it already contains several profiles for different meeting of requirements, like for sys benchmark, for devsec, or for inspec, they also have these profiles, or maybe, as you can see, even exist profiles to close some security issues, like it checked like this meet, like close these security issues. Or for example, you need to use sys Kubernetes benchmark and check that your Kubernetes master and everything else works correctly and set up correctly. Or docking benchmark you need, or you need just check your Linux machine, like it's good stopped without any open issues. In these cases, you can use exactly these available profiles. Of course, this is, for example, DevSec. DevSec is separate stuff called DevOps plus security. It's automatic server hardening. It's provided profiles with controls, and also additional Ansible, Chef, or even some images of machines which already did some hardening. Hardening, it's like closing some default settings or maybe not very secure settings. So you already know it, at least it's secure by default, like apply settings secure by some meeting conditions. As you can see, DevSec cover only OS, components, and applications. It doesn't need to think about login, monitoring, user management, maybe some firewall, everything else. It's not about DevSec. DevSec thinking about this number of layers. So how you work with InSpec supermarket, you had this command info where you can ask, okay, give me the info about this profile and description, and you can of course exec them just directly into some host, but maybe you don't trust this, or so you can use also, instead of inspect supermarket exec, just inspect exec. As you remember, we can execute git without problem, or you can even clone git and apply it here, or for example, you need all these controls basically, but not all of them, but maybe part of them apply to this remote target. You can do this too by this additional controls attribute, which in these cases will only run this number of controls, not all of them. If, for example, you want to apply this directly without adding into your profile and include this into your pipeline system. So let's go into compliance documentation. So our compliance documentation, they can be different and provided by different companies, because here's our compliance standard bodies: International Organization for Standardization, Center of Internet Security, CIS, Department of Defense. I think General Data Protection Regulation, everybody here several years ago. The Payment Card Industry Security Standard Council, which also create additional security standard, also exists for health check and working with this data. And if you do something like, for example, working with credit cards, you need to meet this compliance. I think mostly because nobody will trust your credit card if you at least not meet this compliance. The same if you're working with European Union data, you need for today meet the GDPR compliance. So this is example, like you can have these documents, like here example of sys benchmark documents for latest Linux, and you can open it and it contain all this stuff, like ensure this one executed, ensure this one executed, like it's provide why it should be done, how it should be done, and the way how to close this problem. So mostly what you do as a developer, you mostly go by this document, find some like this point, and you write like sys for this, like you need control for this point of sys, how big impact. For example, this document doesn't provide impact, so you should calculate it. many teams use exactly this common vulnerability scoring system to calculate this impact. You provide title, description, and of course provide this test. Like for example, in these cases, default user mask is 0.27 or more restrictive. And in these cases, as you can see, we checking this exactly this information. So next, let's move to cloud platform, because mostly then I'm talking about Docker containers, images. Some said, okay, we already compliant on this level, but maybe we need to be compliant also on infrastructure level, like in our cloud providers. In these cases, you can do this too in Chef. Like in this example, I can describe that this AWS security group should exist, maybe contain some open or closed ports. And in these cases, I can just provide target in this way, target AWS. And profile this setup for AWS CLI interface. Next one is Google Cloud, for example. I can also write, I need Google Compute Network to be exist and check some of this stuff, and then provide this GCP target. In these cases, it will run and check that my infrastructure the same as needed. For our automation, we mostly use Terraform, and sometimes you need like combine all this stuff. Like you had Terraform, you had in Chef spec, and you need like Terraform should provide some information for InSpec. For example, your VPC ID or maybe your project ID, like here. It's very simple to do. Like you create your resources in Terraform. Like for example, here's security groups, you provide some VPC information, and you use something like output in Terraform, which will output this information. And you use command line Terraform output JSON, which of course generate for you Terraform JSON information. After this, due to Ruby InSpec is just Ruby, you can of course write like read this file, JSON file, parse it, and then get from there information about, for example, VPC ID. And after this, apply these variables into your InSpec controls, like your AWS VPC should exist, should contain exactly this block. The same about security groups, and even, for example, descriptions should be exactly that you wrote here. So in these cases, your Terraform, your instances can be added into pipeline, and you always, for example, if you change in your Terraform infrastructure, you also should change this InSpec configuration to meet these requirements. So you cannot just go and to add something into Terraform and think it's okay, because in these cases, InSpec configuration should be modified and provide information why it's done, is it secure, is it good or maybe bad, or you shouldn't, for example, open some ports on security groups. Troubleshooting. It's also very interesting stuff, because maybe sometimes something doesn't work and you need to understand how to do this. Of course, the basic stuff is to use logging, like you can here at log level debug. And in these cases, it will provide you additional information like what it's doing. Yeah, I need additional dash. So where exactly it's going, what exactly it's doing. Yeah, you can see more verbose information in this stuff, like where exactly it's, how it's register rules, how exactly connecting to this remote host by port and everything else. But maybe it's not enough, and you need like go and check in like console way. In these cases, you can use in Chef spec. It's additional tool. It's use pry under the hood, and it's just standard pry terminal. So we can again go into our command, and instead of this, by even remote host, we can say like inspect shell, please provide for me. And in these cases, it will go into this remote machine, provide for you detection information like OS name, families, release, all this stuff. You can even check like OS Debian, and it's yes, of course, but Windows, yes, of course it's not. And of course, I can also get some information from here, like name of this OS, and even all this stuff. For example, SSD config, which we use in describe. Here we can use it, and for example, here is just matcher, so I can check its content. For example, here, for example, I read the content of this file, and if I need to do some checks, like for example, let's go and rerun this check, which should pass in these cases. It just should pass here. So you can debug all this information here, not going away somewhere or debugging all this information. So it's, as I said, it's standard write terminal. It just works. So this is how you do this if you need also, like, for example, testing your AWS stuff and checking why this receipt or that doesn't work. In these cases, you can use these shell capabilities. So in conclusion, why mostly you need this InSpec? It helps you turn your compliance, your security, and your policy requirements into one automated tool. Like you can migrate your documents. Of course, no automatic stuff which migrate documents into the code. It still need to be done by you, by some human. But still, it's a very interesting tool. Of course, written on Ruby. That's why we like them. And it's a platform agnostic tool. Like you can, in the same DSL, in the same tool, write for your AWS, for Google Cloud, and even for your instance in the same language, all your compliance or security stuff, and check them continuously, adding it into your pipeline, which build your Docker images or build in your images for OS, like Debian, Debian, Ubuntu, maybe some Red Hat instances already. Or maybe you have your infrastructure with Terraform and you need to check this infrastructure meet your requirements. In these cases, you can cover this too. So that's all, guys and girls. Questions?
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting session. Yeah, I guess now we can move to the question and answer. Alexey, can you see this section in Zoom, the Q&A?
Yes. Have you looked at server spec as well? Haven't used these, but read about server spec before. I wonder what the difference between them. Maybe you know. Okay. Yes, server spec and InSpec, it's very similar. Even InSpec started as a fork from server spec, but InSpec, of course, start to develop in this additional stuff like descriptions, impact, inheritance of controls. That's why if you already use server spec, it's very simple to migrate if you want to InSpec, because InSpec start to grow in exactly this compliance, cloud providers, and everything else. But if you're okay and like to use server spec, it's almost the same, almost. Of course, it doesn't have all these additional maybe features like impact stuff and everything else. But if you don't need this information, like how critical this or that security, open ports, or maybe kernel settings, you can still live with server spec. Paket Yarovой IT compliance, I think it's about Russian. So next question, Paket Yarovой IT compliance. I don't know. I'm not I'm automation specialist. I'm not about these documents, and I don't know what exactly Paket Yarovой said about security. I think it mostly said about collecting information and store this information. How long, and that this information should be searchable. So I think it's not about security, it's mostly about monitoring activity of another people. Will the video recording be available later? I don't know.
Yes, the video will definitely be available for later. Yeah, we still have some time for the questions, so I want to remind all our attendees, if there are more questions, keep asking, because we still have some time. I think there is a new question right now.
Do you recommend InSpec for non-Ruby infrastructure too? Yes, of course. It's not for Ruby, as I showed before. It's you don't check this with Ruby. You just use Ruby as a language. That's, for example, many specialists, like security specialists, like in InSpec, because it's very simple language, DSL. which everybody can read. For example, I no need to additional information to describe this code, like what's exactly going on here. Everybody which at least knows something about English language can read this, understand that I check this or that information. So it's not for Ruby, it's mostly for security written on Ruby. It's because in written Ruby, it's not bad. That's why mostly who write all this stuff even first meet Ruby in this InSpec DSL. They even maybe not know that it is Ruby under the hood.
Okay, it looks like there is another question which has been put in the chat instead of the Q&A section. And they ask, what tools do you use to check Chef cookbooks, if any?
Chef cookbooks. Yeah, for Chef cookbooks, you had, if you need exactly checking test inside these cookbooks, you had the test kitchen, or also additional tools like chef test. So it's contain also additional libraries to testing cookbooks itself, but it's not about like security stuff. It's mostly like you need to check that this cookbook works, for example, on CentOS and Ubuntu instances. But this one, it's more important. It's not about cookbooks. It's about like you're applying cookbooks, and now you need to check that these cookbooks meet of your requirements. Like, for example, you not open password authentication by SSH or do something else stupid. And in this case, the security team came to you and start like beating you until you fix this into your cookbooks.
Makes sense. There's a new question in Q&A, but it looks like it has disappeared. Maybe it has been deleted. Since we still have some time, I would like to answer. Yeah, you mentioned that you used Terraform before. Why Terraform, or can we use something a little bit more general? Yeah, why is this choice?
I think Terraform is already more general because Terraform support all these clouds, Azure, Google, AWS, and even some non-classical stuff like Alibaba or something like this. So it's like one language is support many cloud providers. I even don't know what exactly can be more general. More general, it's or by hand, or maybe use something built into these cloud providers tools. Like, for example, AWS had CloudFormation, but CloudFormation is special only for AWS. So you cannot apply the same rule or the same YAML configuration into Google Cloud. That's why for us, Terraform, it's like general because you use the same DSL language, not the same rules, of course, but to write infrastructure to Google Cloud, to AWS, or anything else. And I don't know how many tools right now, except Terraform, can be more general for multi-cloud providers.
I was asking that because I think that in Terraform, you still have, for example, if you configure something for AWS, you still have some AWS specific configuration. And then if you want to really build up the infrastructure in a different cloud engine, I think it still needs a lot of modification.
Yes,
I'm not
correct.
sure how much, for example, a technology like Kubernetes could work in this moment. But yeah, I guess someone with more experience could.
Yeah, so how it can be used, like you testing that your infrastructure which you set up for Kubernetes, because you still need to set up Kubernetes cluster inside AWS and in Google Cloud. So you check like you set up it in the right way with all your security stuff and everything else. And then you go inside Kubernetes and also apply these rules with general for Kubernetes by your Chef InSpec. So it can be used on different level of checks, cloud providers, instances, or even clusters.
Makes sense. Thanks a lot. Are there maybe any questions, maybe some questions from our attendees?
We have some more questions in chat. Do you run InSpec test automatically?
Well, it depends from the product, of course. But yeah, mostly what very good to run them automatically. It's like should be the same way like your linters test environment, like you test something, and these two, like if you run like your Terraform stuff and trying, for example, apply it automatically. So it's better way also after this automatic apply this Terraform stuff in your I think, build server or CI server, you're also very good to run after this in Chef checks, like it's pass. How do you extend if you need some special matches? Because it's Ruby, and in Chef spec also provide this additional folder called, because structure of this profile can be bigger, you can provide lib, a library, and in this library you can extend your matchers and provide some additional matchers if you need, like in the same way as you will do this for AirSpec, for example. So it's not very hard work. Should it be deployed on every single machine to test, or can be run remotely? It depends again from your infrastructure. So you can run on every machine locally, but mostly I don't like to introduce InSpec inside local machines because my local machine is specially built for some applications, not for InSpec. So sometimes better to run InSpec in parallel after some testing on these machines by this target command, like you run it on targets, and then collect feedbacks from these targets fleets. Like you have some fleets of machines and you can need to check that these fleets of machines meet of these requirements. So mostly I like to run by remote target, like from my local machine or my CI or build system, go into a remote machine and apply these rules. But for example, if you concerned about security, because in these cases your CI machine need to have ability to connect to all these machines and you don't want to provide this information, not for developers, not for the CI tools. In these cases, yeah, you can install Chef InSpec inside all of this machine and run periodically it or by some trigger, but it depends on you. Chef InSpec doesn't provide these automatic triggers or something like this. You need to automate it.
Okay, we have a raised hand, and now we will add Alexey to the conversation.
Okay.
Alexey, are you here? Alexey?
Yeah, hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, Alexey, for the talk. It was really interesting. I also want to say, using the moment, I want to say I deeply appreciate you still leading a report podcast. I'm a big fan of it, and thank you for keep doing with that. Regarding the talk, I have, I think, user story, or my question regards to not user, but security guy story. Let's say I'm a security junior engineer, and I want to be sure that in my Rails application, backenders created pay endpoint and don't store user credit card information. So let's say as an input parameter, I have an API endpoint, and as an output, I expect we don't store by hitting this endpoint. We don't store it in DB. With the tool, would I be able to test it, or it would be hard for me to check it with the tool, or it should not be tested with this tool, and I'm missing the concept? Because you mentioned payment international organizations which also have compliance documents.
Yeah, I understand. So the question was, can we check that inside application some endpoints meet some requirements? You can write this, of course, in this tool, but by default, here is no special resources which can do exactly this. I mean, like check that this is a secure compliance endpoint by some of these compliance. You can, of course, wrote this information, but here your question going to application security, like it's another level of security. You need to secure application code base and how it works with business logic. And these two not designed to check inside application security stuff. Like you check in maybe configuration, you check in how exactly data, for example, that it's stored into Postgres, Postgres is running, Postgres hidden by some of this stuff, only available to connect by this configuration. But you can write your, for example, checks which, for example, trigger some endpoints and then go and check that inside your database, nothing here. But I think it's a little task for different tool. Like you can do this because it's Ruby. Like you can do whatever you want, adding additional gems and trigger needed endpoints, but it's already like checking your business logic inside application that it doesn't leak credentials or some user data. It's little different way. So if you will ask me to do this task, I will not apply InSpec. I will do it by different tool, definitely.
Okay, I see. Thank you for answering the question.